The Vietnam War is one of the most widely unpopular wars in United States history. The conflict was between Communist North Vietnam, who wanted to take over the other half of the country, and anti-Communist South Vietnam. The war coincided with the Free Love movement and the hippie generation, who led many protests against the war. Although the war started in 1955, the United States became heavily involved a decade later, in 1964. Tom Rist grew up in a conservative family, and although his father was a war veteran, he did not encourage his children to enlist. At the time Tom joined the Air Force in 1966, he was in the process of moving between Athol, Massachusetts and Westboro, Massachusetts.
I joined the Air Force on my own accord, thinking that joining the Air Force I wouldn't have to go into a war zone, knowing that if I allowed to be drafted or join the Marines or the Army, I would have immediately gone to a war zone. And in hindsight, it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, because I learned a tremendous amount about people, about how to work with people, how people act in stressful situations, and then how people would support you in stressful situations.
These people that Tom learned so much about were a very diverse group.
We had one guy in my squadron who was one of the original members of the Hells Angels of California, to a guy who was a poetry major at, I want to say it was somewhere here in the East. So you had a real cross-section of people. Yeah. And so that was one of the beauties of that kind of situation, because you got to be with these people that were from all walks of life. And the guys that lived on the south side of Chicago to guys that lived on a ranch in Texas.
But before Tom met any of these people, he completed basic training in San Antonio, Texas, and then went to technical school at a base in Denver, Colorado. The day that Tom found out he was going to be headed to Vietnam is one that changed his life.
There are certain days in your life you remember almost everything. You remember the moment, and I probably will never forget it. We were all standing around at the end of one of the classes, and it was toward the tail end, and we're all standing around just talking with the instructors and the people in the class, and in walked a captain and called us all into a meeting and told us that each and every one of us was going to Vietnam. My initial reaction was fear. Flat out fear, because I had no idea what to expect. And then your mind just starts playing games with yourself. Now you start thinking about what you see on television. Because it was the first war that you could get video back within 24 hours, and it would be on national television, and there would be reporting coming from the war zones and that type of thing. So your mind started playing tricks on you.
Tom and his unit, after months of training in technical school, gathered after their final leave at a base in Seattle. They were flown first to Tokyo and then into Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam, to be shuttled to their various bases.
Cam Ranh Bay, which is in the southern part of South Vietnam, which had a big air base for deployment of people. Once you got in there, you then waited for planes to take you, small cargo planes to take you to various places within the country. And that was part of that transportation link. It was somewhat full of comedy and also fear, because of you'd be getting onto this small cargo plane in this steamy 100-degree weather in the middle of July, and you'd be sitting on the deck of this plane with your duffel bag and filled with your clothing, and on the plane would come everybody from Vietnamese with chickens and goats, and they'd put them in a little pen on the side of the plane, and then you'd have special forces come in and sit down all by themselves, not say a word to anybody, and so you're seeing all these people come and go off this plane as you were flying from base to base to base throughout the country to get to your base. It was kind of like a bus service.
Right.
Off the green line, you take a bus to get somewhere, and you take a bus from here to there, and people come and go, and you could just sit there all day and say, wow, that person's really interesting. So that was my kind of introduction into the country. First thing, I'll never forget this. The door opens on the aircraft, and I must have been sitting midway in this big jet plane, whatever. And you immediately get blasted with this odor and this heat and this humidity. And that odor, which is up the jungle and various things associated with that environment, smells like. And that never went away from you for the whole time you were there. And the base that I went to is a place called Tuy Hoa, which was on the South China Sea. It was midway between Saigon and the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, which separated South Vietnam and North Vietnam.
Immediately after arriving at the base, Tom began his work on the bombs.
The initial training was building bombs, rockets, and missiles that would be loaded on planes to fly out and do bombing, missile, rocket runs against the enemy. And what I did in Vietnam was essentially that, which you would prepare bombs and missiles and rockets with timing devices, and you would load explosives and build the components together to get a proper bomb that they wanted for a certain kind of air raid that they were doing, a bombing run raid, which each time was a little bit different. And you did that 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, month after month. You worked in groups, groups of 5 or 6 people. At some point, when you're working with these people and you work with them day in and day out, and you did this almost the same things almost every other day, that kind of thing, you learned their moves, and you learned every single move that those people could do or couldn't do. Therefore, it became the most intriguing work relationship I ever had in my life, and I'll never have that again. It's really quite astounding how well you can work with people when you have to, because you just knew everything about them,
Right.
which is pretty cool. That was a real positive aspect of being there. But, you knew that the day you left the war zone, that would never happen again.
In July of 1968, Tom's time in Vietnam came to a close. His 12 months were up, and he flew back to the United States, landing in San Francisco, California. When Tom returned to the U.S., his welcome home was not exactly of the open arms variety.
I had to be debriefed, and I couldn't get another flight out for a couple of days for some reason. So I stayed in Northern California, in and around the San Francisco area, and I was in a bar with this other guy that was coming back at the same time, we got called baby killers and all that, and we got beat up that night. So we got jumped just outside the bar, and so that was your welcome home.
Tom learned many things from his time at Tuy Hoa, but there are two that are especially meaningful.
I learned about how our government can waste huge amounts of money and also not manage a process correctly.
Singing songs and a carrying signs, mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going on.